And yeah, of course, if anybody's got any issues with the recording, please let me know. Okay, we are recording as of now. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll start again. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. We will be discussing data management planning, or otherwise known as a DMP. So as far as data management planning is concerned, what we're going to be what that is essentially a plan in terms of how to use and access your research data and how to make it available to other researchers in terms of your research project. Other institutions internationally and in some cases locally have actually made data management planning mandatory in order to make as part of the research proposal or grant proposal. So without further ado, what we're going to do today is we're going to use a guide that I wrote. It is available on the library webpage, and I will be putting up the links as well. So I will share my screen now, and please use the chat function if you have any questions. We'll be paying attention to those, and we may answer them as we go along, or we'll leave them till the end. It depends on how much time we have available. So let's get started. Share. Okay. And now we're not responding. Share screen.
Mark, did we lose you, or is it my connection? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, thanks. So I guess we do have an issue. Well, this seems a good time to remind attendees that we have that we will also be providing the recordings, for these webinars. So if you or other colleagues, would like to go through the material that we cover in these sessions, you will be able to do that after the fact. And yeah, Mark has now officially disappeared off the call, so he seems to be having connectivity issues. I wonder if this is because the library was busy overhauling the Wi-Fi these days, but let's give him a minute. Sorry for the inconvenience. Hello again, Mark. Can you hear us?
Mattia, I'm back.
Okay.
I have no idea what is happening today, but
okay, we can see your screen now, if that's any help. You did indeed not show up earlier, but I suspect it was, well, it might have been a connectivity issue for all I know, but let's go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we've got in front of you is a subject guide. The guide itself is available on our library webpage, and I will place that in the chat in a minute. Sorry. So I'll place the link in the chat in a minute. Just to show you how to get here, from the library webpage, you would select students, the student page. And from the student page, you move forward to the subject guides, which is that page. And the subject guides are in alphabetical order by faculty first. Oh my goodness. And okay. This is embarrassing. Okay, my apologies, let's just continue. So as far as the guide is concerned, when it comes to research data or research data management, what has become prevalent in the last few years is that funders and institutions are requiring researchers to provide access to their research data. What is important to know about your research data is the fact that as far as research data is concerned, it can have a life beyond the project for which it is being collected. What this means is that your data may be available either in the same, may be available to assist other researchers, either in the same field that you are in or in a completely different one. As far as the guide goes, what we've got, and we'll just go through the structure quickly. What we've got on the left is research data. We have the FAIR data principles. On the second column, we have UWC research data repositories. And we have the data management planning elements on the right. A little bit further down, we've got some more information, useful tools and resources on the left. Why share research data? And on the right, citing research data. So for now, we're going to look at something called the FAIR data principles. These are guiding principles that researchers need to apply to describing and managing their research data. The FAIR principles, F-A-I-R, are an acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. Findable data is data that is recorded in such a way that it is discoverable by other researchers by applying the appropriate metadata or an appropriate description of the data within a storage facility. The storage facility itself is, in our case, is our data repository known as Kikapu. We also have a Zenodo repository as well. Accessible means that the data needs to be stored for a long-term period, but also needs to be accessible. What this means is that data needs to be stored in such a way that that researchers do not need to pay for it or do not need to subscribe to a website in order to get hold of it or to use it. And it needs to be written in such a way that it can be used by other researchers or described in such a way that it is useful. Data also needs to be interoperable. Data and metadata, in other words, the data itself and the description of the data, needs to be written in such a way or in such a format that it can be used by another researcher. We have had cases where researchers have written data in a software format or using a software program or a format that is unique to the project. In other words, nobody else had access to the actual data or can use the data unless you have a similar software. So as far as interoperability is concerned, it is important to use formats that are publicly accessible. Data also needs to be reusable. The goal of reusing data, or the goal of research data management, is to make data available so that it can be used elsewhere. Data needs to be successfully or fully described in such a way that, and in as much detail as possible, to indicate where it comes from, why it was collected, how it was collected, how it was used, and how it should be used. So the principles for fair data apply to the data itself, the actual digital object. It applies to the metadata, the description of the object, and it also applies to the infrastructure where the data is stored and from which it is shared. The fair data principles are available online, and they can be accessed using the link on the right-hand side where it says fair data. We also have a link for open access and fair data. And then we have the fair data guiding principles for scientific data management and stewardship. So the original documents are available and you can link to those. At the top of this box, we have the National Research Foundation Statement on Open Access. What this means, or what the statement briefly says, is that as far as publicly funded research data is concerned, the publications that are produced out of the research need to be published in open access, and that includes the data supporting the conclusions in that publication, or supporting the conclusions of the project. So as far as research data management is concerned, it is important to consider how your data is going to be accessed by other people or other researchers beyond the lifespan of the project for which it was created. What we're going to look at now, before we move forward, so as far as sharing research data is concerned, there are a couple of benefits for it. One is it promotes new discovery. In other words, if your data is available to other researchers, you may find that it can actually generate new research. As far as increasing research impact is concerned, data can be cited, and our research data repository makes it possible to make your data citable, especially with the use of a DOI, which is attached to your data file. Your research data, or sharing research data, also supports validation and replication. With changing conditions in the environment, you may find that at some point, someone is going to ask you to validate your research or to replicate your research. As far as the data is concerned, it will support any kind. If your project is repeated in a few years' time, you can use these shared data in order to validate the conclusions reached by someone else. It also enhances collaboration. Public data, or data available publicly, can make it possible for other researchers to contact you and want to collaborate on any kind of future research project. It does make your track record in terms of collecting data and research publicly available. The return on public investment simply means that as far as publicly funded data is concerned, the benefits of sharing the data the benefits of sharing the research data is such that it does reach the public and it does contribute to the public good. As far as reduced redundant research is concerned, what will happen is if you're part of a project and a number of students or a number of researchers are working on a similar project, why not share the research data so that no one goes ahead and has to recollect the same data over and over again in order to work on the same project. You may find that the data collected is such that it can answer a number of questions and potentially in a number of different fields. So the result is a reduction in the amount of time spent as far as research data is concerned, or collecting data is concerned. So just below that, we have an article on publishing research data. Well, 2 articles on publishing of research data. These you can have a look at a little bit later. What we're going to do now is we're going to move forward and we're going to discuss the elements of building a data management plan. There are a number of different options available to you, and these are available. You can click on those links in the box on the left, which says your useful tools and resources. So I'll just be loading a few of them quickly. So the Data Intensive Research Initiative of South Africa is one of the projects that we'll be looking at. And I'll also be looking at an element, at a spreadsheet that I created a little while ago. That'll be available to you in the chat soon enough, as soon as I can load it. Okay, we'll get to the spreadsheet later. The Data Intensive Research Initiative of South Africa is a national project that has created a platform where research data, or researchers can create a data management plan. The little button in the middle over there says SA Data Management Planning Tool. And here we'll have a look. The tool itself is something for which you need to register. What I'm going to show you is what a public data management plan looks like. As far as this tool is concerned, it is completely free, and you're welcome to register and use it as in order to help you build a plan. What we are going to look at is the public DMPs at the top. And these are data management plans that have been created earlier. So let's have a look at this one. So this particular one, created by Johan van Wyk at the University of Pretoria, is based on the National Research Foundation template. And what you can see here is that the plan is divided into a number of different sections. The first part is the administrative data section. And here we have a couple of questions that need to be responded to, or that need to be answered. One of them is, are there any related policies? And in this case, the policy would be the Research Data Management Policy, or the RDM Policy and Procedures document at the University of Pretoria. For UWC, this would be the RDM Policy for the University of the Western Cape. What we have here is data collection, and this section on data collection is to explain what is collected or what data is created. Documentation and metadata, these are documents that describe how the data is going to be used. In this particular case, the document is a Microsoft Word document. The metadata itself is created using something called the Dublin Core Standard. The metadata scheme or description that is used in order to describe the research data is something that you'll find in the data repository, which in our case is Figshare. But bear in mind that as far as a data management plan is concerned, it does not necessarily have to be a complex document. In this particular case, it is a text document, and which is stored as a PDF. Moving forward, we have the ethics and legal compliance issues. And what we need to what this part discusses is how will you manage any ethical issues? And in this case, they will ensure that the ethical data is handled securely, or data in general is handled securely. How will you manage any ethical issues? And again, they've repeated the same response. Under storage and backup, you will indicate how will your data be stored and how it will be backed up during your research project. In this particular case, what we are referring to is the storage of research data in an online facility. This is not a memory stick or a laptop or a hard drive. As far as the data is concerned, with regard to the University of Pretoria, in this case, they've used a Google Drive. The next one is how would you manage access and security? In other words, how will you identify or identify users who are going to use the data itself? In this case, what they've indicated is that a username or a password, a user ID or a password is needed in order to access this particular Google Drive. So whoever is using the data or requesting access to it can be identified. With regard to selection and preservation, we need to discuss which data should be retained or shared or preserved. And as far as they are concerned, with regard to this project, all the data will be kept for a long-term period. What is long-term preservation plan for the data set? In this case, the data will be kept for 10 years in the university's Google Drive. Under data sharing, how will you share the research data? And the response was only anonymized research data will be shared. And then responsibilities and resources, who will be responsible for data management? In this case, the principal investigator takes responsibility for the management of the data. And the second question, what resources will be required to deliver your plan? Bear in mind that as far as the data is concerned, large data sets are sometimes given to a data management or analysis company in order to assist, especially when the data is of such a size that a normal laptop or a normal computer cannot manage the analysis of a very large data set. In this particular case, you do need to identify who the service provider is, and a contract needs to be concluded with the service provider in order to make sure that when the data is returned, that they do not retain a copy of the actual data itself. What is important, as I said, about this project, about this data management plan, is that it is fairly simple and straightforward document. There are far more complicated versions, and we'll have a look at one of those soon. What we're going to do now, we're just going to move back to the DERISA webpage, and right at the top, you will also see funder requirements. And in this particular case, what we've got here is the template for each of the data, for each of the funders or institutions that fund research and require a data management plan. So we just have two here, the National Research Foundation and Wits University. And at the bottom, we've got the Wits University NRF template. And what it says is minimum of questions you need to think about to create a project plan. So the details themselves are available at the guide that's listed here. The NRF template at the top is a fairly straightforward one, and this is the one that we've just gone through. Obviously, in this case, the document itself does not have any responses. So here we've got the full document, which in the different sections, such as administrative data, data collection, documentation and metadata, ethics and legal compliance, storage and backup, selection and preservation, data sharing, and responsibilities and resources. This document you can download. It is a PDF file, and you can actually use it on your own. in order to help guide you with regard to building a data management plan. Moving forward, the document that you can see now is called the checklist for the data management plan, and this one was created in 2013. The concept of the data management plan was spearheaded by the Document Curation Center, or Digital Curation Center, at the University of Edinburgh. The elements that we see in front of you are fairly extensive. It is a very detailed document, and you can use this one as well in order to guide you in terms of using or building a data management plan. This one is particularly extensive, but it is also important to bear in mind that not all of these elements are applicable or you need to be used. So again, we have administrative data at the top. We have in this case, we have the identity of the primary investigator first. We also have the funder, we have the grant reference number, the project number, and the project description. And under the project description, there are a number of questions related to the project itself. What is the nature of the research? What research questions are you addressing? And for which purpose are you collecting or creating research data? And there is a bit of guidance here. One of them just says, briefly summarize the type of study to help others understand the purpose for which the data is being collected. That essentially is the crux of the entire data management plan. A little bit further down, you can see they will again repeat the principal investigator or researcher. They'll add an ID for the principal researcher. This ID is not your ID number, it is your ORCID, which is preferable. Then we have project data contact, anyone in particular who is responsible for collecting the data. We also have the draft of the first version of the DMP. So the first time that you build a DMP, in this case, you would put in the date of the DMP, the date that the first document was created, and the second, and the line below that, the date that it was changed. You need to bear in mind that conditions do change. And as a result, your data management plan is not a static document. It will need to adapt to the changes and the needs of your research project. Below we have related policies. So these will be any institutional policies or guidelines, and in some cases legislation that you need to subscribe to in order to proceed with your research. One of them is, does your funder have a research data management policy? So in other words, if the funder has a policy and that has indicated certain conditions, you need to identify those. Moving on to data collection, what we'll discuss is the kind of data that you're going to collect or create, what type of format, what is the volume of the data, in other words, how much is being collected. Does your chosen format and software enable sharing and long-term access? And are there any existing data that you can use? The fair data principles, as we mentioned earlier, come into play here, because what you need to explain, or what you need to try and do, is to create your data in such a format that it will be available for an extended period of time. An example, a simple example in our case, is the PDF file format. It's been around for a while, and it's likely to continue to be around for a while. And any kind of Adobe Acrobat software should be able to read an older PDF document. Whereas, as far as MS Word is concerned, the oldest version of MS Word is any files written in the first version of MS Word are not likely to open in the current version of MS Word. Again, we also need to bear in mind that as far as the software is concerned that you are using in terms of the file formats, if they are unique to your project, then any future researcher is unlikely to be able to use your data. A key question that is mentioned here is, are there any existing data that you can use? This applies to data that is available publicly that can be reused. So One example of something like that would be the data that is provided by the City of Cape Town with regard to all of its municipal services. The entire data set is available publicly and can be used and reused for research purposes. So in the case of a research project that possibly looks at something like water use in urban areas, you may find that a data set, that the City of Cape Town data set is more useful, and that you will not necessarily have to go and collect any more data. Okay, moving forward, you need to indicate how you will collect your data, what kind of standards and methodologies that you will need to use, what is the structure of the data and name of your folders and files. What is unique, what is important about something like that is that the file naming structure needs to be in such a format that without opening the file, people could potentially identify what kind of document or what kind of content the file has just by checking the file name. You would also look at something like handle versioning. Handle is the DOI, and you may want to consider something like producing a DOI or a handle for each version of the data that's being stored. So in other words, your primary version would be your raw data, and as the data gets refined repeatedly, each version of the data will potentially need a new DOI or a handle. The DOI is a digital object identifier, the same with the handle, and these are the unique online addresses or locations of the specific file or the specific data file in this case. Your documentation and metadata, what documentation and metadata will accompany your data. Again, in this case, this is a separate file that explains the information that you've collected. It will explain, or it should explain, how it was collected, what it was, why it was collected, how the information was captured, and how it was stored. It's important to understand that as far as the data is concerned, you do need to explain some things like which version of the software that you've used to collect your data, because this could potentially have or cause problems with regard to accessing your data in the future. Ethics and legal compliance. Again, like the NRF template, how will you manage your ethical issues? Have you gained consent for collecting the data? Have you gained consent for preservation or sharing your data from your data subject? How will you protect the identity of your subjects or participants? And how will you handle sensitive data? You may want, in a case like this, you may make reference to a research ethics policy in your field or in your department. This one is a little more complicated. How will you manage copyright and intellectual property? As far as research data is concerned, all research data collected by either a university student or staff member is owned by the university. This is the global norm. So who owns the data is fairly clear. How will you use the data? How will the data be licensed for reuse? Is particularly important. You may, for example, issue a license that says your data may not be used for commercial purposes. You may issue a license, which is called a Creative Commons license, that says your data users cannot create a derivative of your data. In other words, make a copy of the data and make any changes to it, and then still put it forward as the original data. Storage and backup. This would be storage and backup with regard to the repository that we use, or that we recommend using. As far as the library is concerned, we will make sure that your storage and backup is done appropriately. Should you need any kind of explanation with regard to how the backup procedures and policies work with regard to the repository, that is where we come in and we can help you with that. How will you manage access and security? In this case, what are the risks to the data security and how will these be managed? In this particular case, that would mean backup. How will you control access to keep data secure? What's important to remember is that with regard to our facility or the storage facility that we use, which is known as Kikapu, we can store your data in such a way that the file itself will only be available to specific people who you share your links with. We can also create an environment where whoever wants to access your data will need to identify themselves clearly. In terms of selection and preservation, what is important here is that you need to identify which data will be retained, which data will be shared or preserved. As far as the guiding principles are concerned with regard to publishing or published articles, our recommendation is that you share only the data that supports a specific publication, or you share only the final version of the data that you feel can be made public. In terms of long-term preservation, discussing how long the data needs to be stored, what the cost implications are, if any. What's important about storing the data for a long-term period is something that we will discuss with you as the library, should you need any guidance. It will also depend on the kind of data you collect and whether or not, and what the norms are in your field. It is not necessarily the case that your data will be stored or needs to be stored permanently. We do, however, suggest that you do preserve the data, but not necessarily in a format, but not necessarily on a public platform, or at least not share it publicly. As far as data sharing is concerned, the data itself that can be shared publicly or you deem fit to be shared publicly, what you need to do is to be able to say how you're going to share it or how will potential users find out about your data. In this particular case, it's important to describe your data in such a way that a search engine can help other researchers find it. It can be shared under specific conditions. For example, it can be made private and shared only with your colleagues or your students or people in your field. It can also be shared by a dedicated link so that only specific individuals can access your data, or you can make it completely public. Okay. Are there any restrictions on the data sharing required? This will also depend on the field as well as your funder in terms of whether or not your funder prefers that your data be shared publicly. What action will you take to overcome or minimize the restrictions? Your restrictions may be fairly limiting. In the case of data related to medical histories of patients, for example, in a hospital, our recommendation is that you need to be very careful with regard to sharing the research data itself. And when it comes to making something like that public, or something that we will have a meeting and discuss, not only with you as a researcher, but your principal investigator, your supervisor, and any other advisors that we feel are appropriate to provide us with enough advice to be able to identify what can and cannot be shared. This will happen prior to loading any data onto the repository. The roles and responsibilities, again, identify who is responsible for implementing the data management plan or ensuring its review. This essentially is going to be the primary investigator who will be responsible for the data management activity. You could also include someone like a data steward who will look after the data at the end of the project. And in this case, it could be someone in your department, it could be someone in the library as well. What is also important is to identify the resources required to deliver your data plan. As far as the resources are concerned, you need to identify either specialists who will help, either trained staff or existing staff where Someone familiar with your data and familiar with the software that you're using could help you and help identify future users identify how the data can be used and of how future data can be stored. You need to identify the hardware, the software, and any other institutional support. This particular case, what you also need to do is to identify the data and the data analysis software that was used, as well as the version that was used, so that in the future someone could actually use your data. This is where the interoperable and reusable aspect of the FAIR data principles comes in. Okay, so this one is the comprehensive data management plan from the Digital Curation Center. And as far as we've indicated, not all of these elements need to be applicable. So let's move forward. In this case, we've got data management and curation from the University of Michigan. And it is a far simpler version of the data management plan. And you can see the elements on the left, the description in the middle and what the recommendations are on the right. But the elements are fairly straightforward. It's data description, existing data, format, metadata, storage, backup, security, responsibility, intellectual property rights, access and sharing, who the intended audience is, selection and retention periods, archiving and preservation of the data, ethics and privacy issues, what your budget is, what your data organization is, what the quality assurance processes are, and if there are any legal requirements, these are added as well. What is different about this particular template is the budget and the legal requirements. My apologies, that's the same one. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to have a look at the template quickly that I've created. And okay, so what we've got here is, my apologies for that. So what we're looking at here is a worksheet or a spreadsheet that has the elements for the University of Michigan Data Management Plan template. It's the one that I just read out. The link itself is at the top here. And all of these will be shared in the chat. But as far as the preservation is, the policy is concerned, all of the elements are on the left and the description of the details are on the right. Should you wish to use a template similar to this one, you're welcome to download it and edit it. The next sheet of the 3 sheets that are available here is the checklist for the Digital Curation Center. And here I've just transferred all of the elements from the DCC checklist onto this page. And the third one is the National Research Foundation template. And in this particular case also, we have all of the elements as indicated on the NRF plan, on the NRF template. And my suggestion in this case under administrative data is that you identify the registering institution and the principal investigator at the top under administrative data. The rest of the process is fairly straightforward, and it follows the data collection, data and metadata, documentation and metadata, ethics and legal compliance, storage and backup, selection and preservation and data sharing, and the responsibilities and resources. As I've indicated, identifying the principal investigator is something that you need to do right at the top. Okay, so let's have a look. Not that one. Apologies for that. Okay, so going back to the guide, the basics of the data management plan on the right-hand side are listed here. And what I've done is I've broken it down into the different sections that will help guide you create this plan. So at the top, you would start with your data description, access and sharing, metadata, intellectual property rights, ethics and privacy, format, and then it proceeds all the way to the bottom. What I'd like to do now is to show you where all of the data actually goes. So for that, we'll go into the UWC data repository, Kikapu. In this case, it's in this box here. What we have here is an introduction to Figshare, which is the software platform that we use for the repository. We also have a video here that explains how the data itself is uploaded. Here we have the links to our Zenodo repository, as well as how to upload to Zenodo. For now, we're just going to look at Kikapu quickly. So our website is kikapu, kikapu.uwc.ac.za. And all of the links are available on this page. What you'll find, I have already logged in here, but what you'll find is that when we open up the page for the first time, it will ask you to register with your Novell or eCanva password. It will create an account for you automatically, and then it will open this page. This will be the front page. The repository itself looks like this. And what you'll find is that we have a few stats on the front page. So far, we have had 29,000 views, nearly 30,000, and just over 8,000 downloads of the research data itself. What we've been able to load at the top here are a number of webinars that were created. But as far as the data is concerned, we have research data records a little bit further down. And the data records like this one, which was posted 2018, are records that we can make available, is an actual data set that was created for the library. And at the bottom, we will have the data itself around this data set, or at least the metadata around the data set. And in this case, it's been viewed 677 times, and it's been downloaded 121 times. So just to go back, in terms of uploading the research data, it's fairly straightforward, and it does take a very short time. So what we're going to do is we're going to select upload. And a simple method as far as uploading is concerned is to drag and drop a file here or to browse a file. So what we're going to do is just upload something simple. So what we're going to do is upload a simple image. In your case, it would be either a spreadsheet file my computer is slowing down very much. And what opens is, at the top, we have the actual file itself. We'll have the title. The author will go in, we'll select a category. We'll just select one for now. We'll select a research group, in this case UWC, and I will place mine under the UWC Library. We'll have keywords which we'll enter. And we'll need to add a description as well. Try and make your description as extensive as possible to make sure that someone else can see it. This is where you would indicate your funder, funding source, or grant number. You can indicate a resource title, in other words, a publication perhaps, related to your data. You can add a DOI for your publication. You can reference related content. The license agreement here, the Creative Commons license agreement, indicates clearly that anyone using the data has to credit you. We can certainly discuss Creative Commons licenses at a later stage. Here you can apply an embargo. In other words, you can close the file for a particular period of time. You can generate a private link in order to share the file specifically with specific people. And here you can reserve a digital object identifier, which will be used to publish your data. As far as the data records are concerned, I'm having a problem with, sorry. So as far as the data record is concerned, that essentially is the metadata. Obviously, when it comes to a more complicated data set, the metadata becomes more complex. And that is something that we are able to help you with. In this case, as far as our data is concerned, we recommend that you do not publish your data in any way until you've had a discussion with either a principal investigator or supervisor or us as the library to make sure that the data itself does not go out publicly. A data record can be created without making it public until such time as the data itself can be made available or legally made available to share. In this case, I am not going to save the changes. I'm just going to cancel, as this was a
Mark, sorry, but there was a question sent to me privately in the chat. The recording will be made available. I guess we didn't discuss how exactly, but I think it's probably going to appear on Kikapo itself.
Yes, we will do that.
Okay, so to answer the question of Joshua, we will upload it to Kikapo, and I think we will also create links, I mean, via the eResearch.uwc.ac.za webpage for simplicity. So you should be able to find it, I mean, via Kikapo. Is there a specific handle we will look for? I think it will show up as a document by yourself, Mark. I think that will be the most recognizable thing.
Yes, it will. It will show.
Okay, so you should. So if in doubt, I mean, you should look for Mark Snyders on Kikapo next week. I'm still trying to think if there is a way to record the participants of the webinar so that we can email them individually. But I don't think we set up the webinar so that we capture the participants. So it might be difficult to email everybody individually. But we will probably get better at this over time. Thanks.
Thank you. Just for reference sake, I am pasting the guide, a link to the guide that contains a link to all of the information that I've discussed and all of the pages we've looked at. My email address I'll also place here quickly. Okay. And anybody is welcome to contact me anytime in order to help, if they need any kind of help. Okay, thank you. My apologies again. This was a little bit rushed due to my technical problem earlier.
Well, thanks for sticking to time. I'm sure, I mean, people have got other meetings to go to, but I'd like to offer the opportunity to ask some questions now, if people can stay on for a few more minutes. Still have some 5 people on the call, so let me see. There is something on the chat. Oh no, that's Mark's links, of course. So yeah, I think the main reference for this, I mean, sometimes it is difficult to navigate our different websites across campus. So the main reference for this is the library libguides, I mean, linked by Mark in the chat. So this is the one-stop shop, I mean, for all. That's the research data management. Is that how it's called, or is it? Is it? Okay, great. So if you go to the libguides website, I mean, you will find, I mean, the RDM libguide, I mean, edited by Mark, and that's a one-stop shop to all RDM needs. And yes, we are slowly, I mean, rolling out, I mean, more content on Kikapu. So hopefully, I mean, particularly in these days of webinars and the like, I mean, we will incorporate more material there. And so perhaps, I mean, the libguides will be updated, I mean, to link to some of these recordings at some point. But yes, but yeah, we are developing things as we speak. So it's your feedback would be much appreciated. I mean, to Mark and or to myself.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, I'm glad we were able to get onto Fixture, I mean, this time around, and so I think it was good to do this twice this week. So thanks, everybody, and check out the Kikapu website, I mean, for the recording, probably by Monday or so. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.